right, everybody, welcome to the Geekcast podcast. I'm revamping some things here. We are going to be more of a video on demand format versus live streaming, but I think that you guys will get better storytelling this way, as a podcast should be. And today I have a good buddy of mine and a good buddy of some of you guys that are viewers as well, Mr. Steve from Steve's Game Room, aka SGR. Welcome, my boy. I'm glad to have you here.
I'm happy to be here, guys.
I'm glad to have you here because like I said in chat and stuff, I kind of needed you here as a Genesis guy like myself because, man, today we are going to be talking about the rise and fall of Sega, not just the Genesis, but the actual rise and fall of Sega, the company, and kind of going back as when Genesis came out, and then kind of talking about things that happened in between with the console war between Nintendo and Sega, and then a bunch of shit in between. And it might actually end up taking 2 separate times for us to record this. We'll cross that bridge when it gets here, but hopefully for you guys that are viewing this right now, maybe we'll be able to get all this shot today. But anyways, Steve, welcome. Glad to have you here. How has your day been going thus far?
Anyway, the day's great. I just literally got off of work, came home, and this guy's like, hey, jump on camera. I'm like, oh yeah, we're supposed to film around that time.
Yeah, that's right. So get your fucking ass down here.
I'm sorry.
Oh,
our
good.
Time zones are a little bit different, but we're going to make it happen.
That's right.
All right.
That's
what matters.
God willing. Really quick, before we talk about the launch of the Genesis or Mega Drive, depending on what side of the world you were on, Nintendo was dominating the console market because you had Atari, and it did well, and then it just basically crashed and burned once the Nintendo came out because it was just pumping out crazy good titles. And for the times, I know some of you youngsters out there are going to be like, oh my god, the graphics were so bad, I could make it on Paint. Like, yeah, I get it. The graphics weren't the best, but it wasn't always about the graphics. It had great games on the console as far as the NES goes. Atari had some good ones, but when you were comparing the two, NES, bar none, was favored by just about everybody. So, up to that point, going into 1988, we're looking at I'll show you guys what I'm actually reading. I'm reading off of the old Wiki real quick. So, talking about October 29th in 1988, the Japan version was released, and so then the Genesis was born, basically, right? And the North America version was released January 9th of 89. So, now that we're talking about the launch of the Genesis. Now, I know you were a little bit younger than myself, and when it was launched, I wasn't even 3 years old yet. So, I don't even think...
What's funny about that? I wasn't born yet.
I was going to say, I don't think Steve was even around yet. But, nonetheless, where were you at, or what were you doing? Like, what got you into the Genesis? Let's hear your backstory to this.
So, whenever I first got the Genesis, I already had NES. I only had like Mario 3 and Mario 1. It was like a Christmas. I got the Sonic 2 bundled in with the Model 2 Sega Genesis. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I was hooked on that. That's why Sonic 2 is still, to this day, my go-to game just to relax. It's not about... Yes, it's a quality game, but it's more like it's just a relaxing game for me to play.
Mm-hmm.
And then eventually I got other games. But honestly, I only had probably 5 or 6 as a child. A lot of times back then, I went to Blockbusters and rented them. That's how I got to find out about all kinds of games and then switch them out here and there. Eventually, I got the Sega CD and things of that sort. We'll get to that later, guys. But yeah, I mean, that console to me really felt like it meant something because it was mine and it was my first system. So the NES, that was like the family console for everyone.
Right.
This was mine. It was in my room. I had my little 20-inch CRT TV in there.
Hell yeah!
It was my space, man. All right.
Yeah. Hell yeah.
So you got to remember, when the system came out, I was young. All right. So I wasn't having friends over at the house. This is back when I lived in Chicago, guys.
Oh boy.
Don't live there now.
Oh gosh. My condolences, Chicago, by the way. Carrying on.
Oh, I love going to Chicago. I'll still go there. But back on topic. So obviously the Sonic game. Sonic Spinball, I kind of got hooked on as a child. I don't know why, because the game's awful, in my opinion. Miss Pac-Man. I cannot tell you how many times I sat down with my cousin and we played Miss Pac-Man, and every time I thought I beat it, when you get to that point where there's a cutscene and they kiss, no, there's another 20 levels.
Yeah.
Another personal favorite of mine, and I love it now even more because my son and daughter like to play it with me, World of Illusion, starring Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck. It's a platforming game. It's not super difficult, but it can be challenging.
Yeah.
There's different levels and aspects. Pulls a lot of Disney movies in there, like Alice in Wonderland, things of that sort. Earthworm Jim's another one that I still cannot beat to this day. But I played it back then, and I still own a copy now. So eventually, SGR is going to have to put that under his belt because it's haunting me, all right?
But I can honestly remember what got me into the Sega Genesis originally. I was about 6 years old, and I was at a buddy's house, and he had a Genesis and had Ghouls and Ghosts. And mind you, super hard game. Should not have even been playing it at 6 years old. But I sat there and I thought it was so cool. It scared the dog shit out of me because the music was super creepy, and I was just a little kid. I got that, and it was just like you. My parents did not buy a lot of games. The only games they bought was, I guess you could say Sonic 2, just because they did buy it, essentially, because it came with the console.
Ow, come on.
Well, I'm just saying.
You had a shoebox, though, right? You had to have a shoebox.
Oh.
Shoebox was where your games go.
We didn't have a shoebox. We had, in the room we referred to as the den. I don't know if anybody even calls rooms dens anymore. The den would be like what we would refer to as almost like the family room / media room or whatever, because it literally was it was just a TV, it was the secondary TV, and it had some shitty ass fucking TV stand that looked like it was 2 seconds away from imploding, but it was sitting on there, and there was the Sega, and then next to it was the games, and that was it. but we had that. They bought Aladdin, Miss Pac-Man, and actually that was it.
You had Sonic and Aladdin as a child. You should be happy, all right?
Now,
Two fantastic games.
But my sister tells me, oh, you got to get this game I was playing over at my friend's house. And I was like, well, what is it? Booger Man. I was like, what? She said, Booger Man. I said, that is not even...
You know what's funny? That's a fantastic game.
It is actually a really good game. It is. It's not bad. And I ended up getting it, and I liked it. It's tough. It's another game that I think people should check out. But anyhow, yeah, that was all they bought. And all the other games I got, I actually acquired. And one of them, oh my god, I am kicking myself for trading it in, which is Splatterhouse 2, because it's
nice.
Yeah, because it costs so much now. I'm like, fuck. So my dad's buddy, his brother, which he ended up, he was a family friend. They always came over. But anyways, when he would beat games for the Genesis, he would just give them to me. And that's how the first game he gave me was Streets of Rage 2. And when I played Streets of Rage 2, my god, to this day, I'm getting the fucking feels all over again. Everything about it. I mean, just seeing the beginning cut scene, of them explaining what's going on, even though I really couldn't read at the time because I was 7 years old, so I really had a vocabulary of a 7-year-old, so I couldn't really read everything that was on the screen. So I really didn't know what was going on, but I knew that Mr. X was a bad guy and he needed to get his ass kicked. And freaking, you know, the music, the visuals, the sound, just everything about it just blew me away as a kid, because you got to think, I went from Sonic, Miss Pac-Man, Aladdin, I played the NES, so you hear and see the visuals for that, and then you play Streets of Rage 2, by far the fucking visuals and everything else just blow all those games out the water, so my mind is just... I was like, oh my god, this is fantastic. It gave me Splatterhouse 2, which my parents weren't too happy about that at the time, so... I mean, the 90s were a weird time. There was some stuff that parents would find, like, super gritty or kids shouldn't have, like, too violent and
The
stuff.
game wasn't that bad, though.
And
come on.
They thought it was horrible because they're like, oh, he's playing as Jason Voorhees killing shit. It's like... But, I'm trying to think, what else did he give me? Oh, Sunset Riders. I had that. And, Dinosaurs for Hire. Dinosaurs for Hire.
Both of those, yeah.
And NBA Jam. And just trying to think. Oh, and then Comic Zone. That was the last game I ever got for the Genesis. And I bought that as well. It was for one of my birthdays. It would have been my 10th birthday. Yeah, because it came out in 96. So, yeah. It was my 10th birthday. That was the last Genesis game that I got. And that was one I talked about on the channel. I played it. It took me about 6 months to beat it because it was so fucking hard. And again, no internet, no strategy guide, just me grinding it and grinding it and grinding it until I could figure out how the fuck to beat it. And then when I did, I never played it again until I think I was in high school. It was like I was close to graduating. I decided to play it again to try to get the good ending because I beat it with the bad ending because the chick died at the end. I didn't save her in time. So, now that we went through our long-winded backstories, but I felt like it was warranted. We needed to add some storytelling in there and let people in on some of our own personal experiences there. So now, like I said, we got Sega. Genesis has hit the scene. It's 1989 in the States, so we'll try to stick with the United States for us and the PAL versions, because those were the main two, I guess you could say, because the Japanese market, I'm not saying I'm trying to ignore it, but all their stuff always happens way before everybody else. So the main thing was always what's going to happen in the North America and European market. Those were always the big two. That's how I took it as when I do my research on things. It always seemed like everything was driven off of how did it sell in North America and over in Europe. So we're going to look at the PAL, and PAL meaning the Mega Drive, and then the American version, which is the Genesis. The Sega Genesis, when it came out, it actually sold better than the Super Nintendo. It did say it came out a little bit before the Super Nintendo, but it said it consecutively beat the Super Nintendo for 4 holiday seasons in sales. And, excuse me, it, where was it at? It said, was it 2-1? Yeah, nearly. It said it beat them nearly 2-1 during the 91 holiday season. So at that point, it says Sega controlled 65% of the 16-bit console market, in January of 1992. The first time Nintendo had not been the console leader since 1985. That is huge.
Yeah, I can believe that, though, because the Sega Genesis, from what I remember, was meant to compete with the NES when it first launched.
Yes.
And eventually, the SNES came out, and they're like, that's when all the Sega does with Nintendo don't stuff started happening.
Right.
Cat processing and all that stuff started going on.
Yeah.
So Sega got their foot in the door early.
Yep.
And just built that audience up.
Yep. Yeah, because what people don't realize, because that was the whole thing, is Sega did it right because they were basically the first 16-bit console to hit the market. because SNES wasn't out yet. So people, that's what they were saying here, is that, people were kind of in that little spot of, well, do I get the Genesis or do I wait and get the SNES? But what happened was, from going on and reading here, is that how Sonic came along is that it was proposed to bundle Sonic with the Genesis, and they wanted to make the Genesis cheaper as well. And it was shot down at first, but he eventually did it. The Sonic the Hedgehog took over as the bundled game for the Genesis, basically, is what it was basically talking about. Because Altered Beast was the original game that was the bundle with the Genesis, but then they changed it to Sonic. And like I said, it went back and forth, but then they eventually went with Sonic. And the other thing...
From what
go ahead.
Sorry.
No.
From what I remember, when they bundled Sonic with that system, that's when it really started taking off.
Yep.
Because everyone wanted that, and eventually led to the bundles with Streets of Rage and all those other games. You had all these crazy bundles, but all it was is a pack-in game at the end of the day.
Exactly.
We didn't have special edition consoles or different colors or anything like that. It's just a different box, which us as collectors would love now.
Oh, yeah.
But back then, nobody cared.
There was a Ranger X bundle. Did you know that?
I had no idea. No.
The only reason I knew that was from when I was trying to find Ranger X before I bought it. I was like, why am I finding not for resale copies? Obviously, it had to be a bundled game. That's the only reason why. That's the only reason why they ever put that on there, because you had the 6-pack. There was a 6-pack bundle. So you'll have some 6-pack games that are not for resale, which were the bundled versions, and then you had the other versions. But yeah, there was a lot of bundled games like after Sonic 2 and Sonic 1. And it's just crazy because, like I said, there's some random ones I find that say not for resale. I'm like, geez, how many fucking bundles did they have? Like, it's crazy, man.
Pack it all in. It's all right. It's going to sell.
But also, as the SNES debuted, there was a console that I didn't even know existed until, I want to say, I was close to graduating high school, which was the TurboGrafx 16. And that is what the original Splatterhouse was on. I bring that up because we were talking about Splatterhouse 2. But Splatterhouse 1 came out on the TurboGrafx 16, and I didn't even know about it. So, I mean, I can see why it failed. I mean, I didn't even know it existed, so they probably had a terrible advertising campaign. But when you look at the library of games on the TurboGrafx, it actually had some solid games on there.
Yeah, I had no idea about that system until much, much later. I want to say when I started looking up YouTube videos on a cell phone is when I learned about that one.
Yeah. 2 years later, SNES had Final Fight, which was an exclusive to SNES. So then Sega came up with Streets of Rage, which was, in my opinion, the better of the two in the series by far. And I'm not even saying it just because I love Streets of Rage 2. I've played Final Fight 1 and Final Fight 2. And if anybody wants to say that Final Fight is better than Streets of Rage, I think we will have to fight. Literally over that, because that's bullshit.
I think the Power Rangers movie game's better.
You fucker.
We're going to fight on stream now.
That's right. Oh, that's it. That was a good game, though. I can't even lie. That was actually a really good game. So, carrying on. So it says, reported early 93, Genesis had 250 games. This is what I mean by just go back and try to look at the library of Genesis, okay? So it had 250 games at this point. 250 games versus 75 on the SNES. So you already have 3 times more video games than your competitor. Like, that's insane. So it says, but limited shelf space meant that stores typically offered 100 Genesis and 50 SNES games. So again, this feeds into the narrative of, oh, guess what? Here's a shitload of games you're never going to hear about because we just don't have them. It's impossible to keep up. And especially, I don't know about you, Steve, but there were a couple mom and pop game shops, not in my city, but within driving distance that I know that people would frequent every now and again when it came to trying to acquire certain games. And they definitely couldn't keep up with that.
Oh yeah, for sure. You can't expect. So I've managed retail stores in the past, many of them. There's a certain shelf life. At a certain point in time, we don't care. Goes the price change and get it out the door.
Yeah.
So that's just how it is.
Yeah. And also at this time, it says the NES at this point, which it should have been, it should be the leader at this point in time, 300 games with 100 on shelves. Now, take this into consideration, folks. The Sega, at this point, was only out for 3 years, has 250 games. NES, at this point, has been out for 8 years. Because I'm trying to think, 8 years? Actually, it might have been 9. What did NES come out? Was it 84? I think it was 84 or 83. I can't remember. It was somewhere around there.
83
So
83 is clicking on my head.
Yeah, so we'll say around 10 years. So in around roughly 10 years, it took them to get 300 titles. And in a matter of 3, Sega's already got 250. And mind you, 96, I believe, was the last year of Genesis games, maybe 97. So it only took them 3 years to damn near get what NES got. So, yeah, that's just insane in my opinion. And again, it's almost like too much of a good thing can be a bad thing, and that's kind of what we'll be getting to here in a minute. I gotta read this. Okay, so it says, a Sony focus group found that teenage boys would not admit to owning an SNES rather than a Genesis. What? What the fuck is that? It's just video games.
You want the hot sports car? You want the broken minivan?
Come on. I guess. You know, I get it because I love Genesis. So I mean, I get it, but I mean, I guess because I was a kid, I wanted them both because I can remember when I first played F-Zero, I was blown away. I love that game. That racing game was fantastic for the times. And I can still play it now. I suck at it, but I'll still play it.
I think a lot of that boiled down to like the advertisement, though. Like, if you didn't own a Genesis, you ain't cool.
Oh, yeah.
Genesis, that kind of thing. They did a lot of stuff like that back then.
Oh yeah, like I'll pull a commercial up for you guys here in a little bit, but you'll see like how they perceived like Sega to the masses, and you got to remember 1990s. So if there's any butthurt troll out there that's like, oh my god, bullying, bad, well, fuck you. It's a fucking commercial from like 30 years ago. So kiss an ass and move on. But they always perceived it like Sega would make you a badass, or it was just the shit, and just the way things that were drawn out back then. So here we are. Let's just do just a slight bit of backtracking. So we were talking about 3 years. Basically Sega was punching Nintendo in the figurative nuts when it came to sales. They were just dominating between sales and a vast library. And it was also funny because they noted something that I actually mentioned earlier, and I didn't expect them to say this, but they said that it appealed to a lot of people because of that arcade vibe that the Genesis brought to the table. And I just found it funny that they actually said that. But in October 15th, 1992, well, this was in Japan, the Sega CD was released. Or I should say, it was released in 91, December of 91. October 15th of 92 in North America. And then April 2nd of 93, it would be released in Europe, which I feel bad for the European fans out there. They got the shaft because Sega CD did not last long. So Sega CD was like supposed to be like the shit. Like it was supposed to be the Sega Genesis on steroids because you were supposed to get CD quality graphics and sounds and this, that, and everything. And guess what? You can take your Genesis, slap that baby, and connect them together, and now you have the full experience. And I'm going to show you guys here real quick. So you can see off to my right here. I'll try to blow it up for you guys. So here you can see. There we go. There we go. So this, usually I always delete my mouse so you can't see, but I'm trying to point. So you can see here, this was the original Sega CD. And then this is what most people I knew had, if they had one, which my cousin did, which was the Model 2. So
That's definitely the more common one.
Yes.
The first model, the laser seems to go out quickly. The second one lasts a lot longer.
Yeah.
And you're right. I mean, that was Sega's answer to the SNES. Like, oh, okay, well, you're doing the FX chip.
Yeah,
All right, like you said, slap that baby on there.
Yep.
Good to go. More power.
Exactly. So you had that, right? So everybody was all fucking, they were all gun-ho about it. They're like, yeah, you got this thing. And then, you got these super sweet graphics. Got this, like, here's what I was going to say, like, it could play audio Cs or CD plus G discs, which what those discs are, for those that don't know, because I actually had to look up what they were, so I just knew what they were, because I wasn't sure. It had nothing to do with this podcast, but those types of discs are what karaoke machines use, so that way you can put the lyrics up onto a screen. So you could technically use your Sega CD as a karaoke machine if you wanted to. If you didn't, I don't know.
Karaoke was really big in Japan. I think that's why that was a thing.
That probably, I would not be surprised, because I know people laugh a lot about, like, some of the stuff that Japanese people like karaoke. They love it. Well, that's their thing.
DDR,
DDR. Oh my goodness. But yeah, so this was going to be the next big thing, because they felt CD quality stuff was the next big thing. Trying to segue away from carts and stuff like that and bring that robust colors. And that was the other thing. The color palette was bigger, the audio was better, it was supposed to be smoother gameplay, all these things, right? So you had this come out. So just keep in mind, folks, 89 you got the Genesis. Now you got 3 years later, you got another system. But the good thing is, don't throw away that Genesis. You can just connect it up. So it's like, okay, all right, I'm not going to be too mad at that as a buyer. There's a reason I'm saying that. We're going to go down there, and then, Steve...
Talk about the price.
Oh,
what was the price
of the
price. Sega CD then?
Yeah, so let's talk about price. So it was originally released for $300. And what was that? And what was that to today's standard, Steve?
Like 651, give or take a little bit.
651. So you already have a Genesis, which you put. We'll call it $100 because I'm not going to go back and look again, but we'll call it $100 because I think that was about what it was. Because I knew they did make them cheaper. So your mom and dad already spent $100 on this console that you had to have. You had to have this Genesis, and then 3 years later, oh, by the way, can you drop 300 on this fancy pants machine here? It's the next thing, guys. So now you just spent 300 more on this guy, the Sega CD. But oh wait, there's more. So, for those of you that don't know, there's a little thing called 32X. So before we kind of go into pricing and stuff, I'll just say the 32X, for those that don't know, super, super failure of a system, if you will. And it was another add-on. You could still use the Genesis, so that's why it's like, yeah, see, just keep on turning this motherfucker into a transformer, and
shove it in that area, then shove it in this area. Just keep molding that thing.
Exactly. That's what we're doing.
God.
We're just gonna keep making more shit. Just pile it on there.
The cord, from what I've seen, is a mess with all three.
Oh man, it looks glorious, but it takes up so much space. It does. But what happened was, North America Sega was wanting to create something else because they just were like, well, I think it's time to like release something else to try to have a new product line, and Sega Japan was arguing, saying, no, 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 we don't want that because we're developing the Saturn. Because they did know that discs were the way of the future, but they were just like, hey, just, cool your jets. We'll get the Saturn, and then all will be right. Everybody will be happy. So Sega America decides to just say, nah, fuck it. Let's release the fucking 32X, man. So here they go.
Fantastic idea.
Yeah, they released the 32X. Okay, so it was released for $159. So it was supposed to be for a, quote, less expensive Saturn. Now, because mind you, people knew about the Saturn, but this was supposed to be, well, we're going to give you this to hold you over type thing. Which, again, doesn't make sense, especially when you hear what's going to happen next. So $159. So your mom and dad spent $100 on the Genesis, then spend $300 on a Sega CD. Then you're coming back at them. This is 94, November 21st of 1994. So, just a couple years.
Don't forget.
Yeah.
Don't forget when the Sega Saturn launches, which is around the corner,
Mm-hmm.
launched at $400.
Yeah.
Because that's the famous line Sony had when they came on stage. It was like $299. Drop the mic.
Yeah.
So now you spend all this money on the Sega Genesis making this Frankenstein of a monster. By the way, the Saturn comes out, what, a year from there?
Oh, yeah.
This is where your story continues.
Oh, yeah, it's bad. So they're like, yeah, get the 32X. This is going to be fucking sweet. November 94, go spend $159 more. So at this point now, your parents have spent, in the matter of 5 years, they have spent, that'd be $560, which would be the equivalent to, I'm sure, well over $1,000 to today's standards on Sega Genesis stuff. Could you imagine? Oh my God,
No,
it's sheer insanity.
Collecting the games, yes, but just the consoles back then?
Oh my
hell
God.
no.
Yeah, because you got to think too, folks. The games were still, they ranged between $40 and $60 back then, depending on the quality of the game or whatever you were buying. Like if it was like a well-known title, it was still probably in that 50 to 60 range back then. So you're talking, that'd be like, to today's standards, you're paying $100 a pop for a game. Like, that's crazy. And I wondered why my parents never bought games.
Blockbuster, man. I'm telling you, that's where it's at back then.
Well, my parents wouldn't rent video games either. Like, hardly ever. There was only a few games that I ever rented. Excuse me. One of which was Hyperstone Heist, and love that game. And I know people be like, oh, it's just like Turtles in Time, which it pretty much is, but there are variants to it as far as there's like a couple different levels or something like that that are slightly different from Turtles in Time. Excuse me, Turtles in Time.
And it's got Tatsu. All right, Tatsu's from the second movie and the first movie, the
Yeah.
OG Turtles.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Like, people just like to overlook that stuff. Don't go, it's the same game. Duh.
Oh, whatever.
I know.
Your Call of Duty every year is a fake game.
Exactly. It's the same thing. They just basically turned a bunch of map packs into a disc. Fuck off.
You got to download the rest of the disc.
And
it's not a cartridge.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't forget 32 gigs of updates every 2 days. God.
So now, mind you, that going back to here, you ready for this? This is one reason too, Steve. I don't know if you knew this or not, because I did not. But this is another reason why I actually wanted a 32X. I could care less about having a Sega CD in my collection, but I did want a 32X. And you ready for this? They only sold 665,000 units. That's not a lot.
That's not a lot. I did not know the number.
No, and that was why, like, I think I shared that with you. I'm almost positive. The 32X that I have, the spacer, the sticker is in pristine condition, and it's still connected. So I was like, I'm not selling that, because that thing is like fucking like a brand new 32X basically that's been untouched. So I was like, yeah, you're gonna stay at home with me, because seeing as
We'll keep you forever.
Yeah, exactly. Because since there's less than 1 million, and now mind you, this is throughout the United States, less than 1 million sold I mean, you're talking. That's crazy. That's because you're talking. There was tens of millions, or consoles being sold for Genesis, SNES, whatever. So the fact that you didn't even break a million, just barely over a half a million, like, oh my god. And then think about this. Let's just say half of them still work.
That's what I was getting ready to say. I was like, you guys got to think about it. Majority of those are destroyed, gone.
Yep.
It's realistic. It's
Yeah.
just like any game console. A lot of people just throw them away sometimes. They don't know what they are.
Yeah.
Or if you go to a garage sale, I'm selling this PS1 here. Give me $1. Take it.
Yeah.
Nobody cares about older consoles unless you know what they are or you're a collector or a
Yeah.
retro gamer
Yeah.
nowadays.
Exactly. And that's why when I saw that number, I was like, my God, I am so glad that I looked this up before I listed that, because my goodness. Because not only do I have that, but I actually have the manual, two manuals that came with it, that particular one. That
You know, you showed me pictures. That's cool.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm like, shit, hell yeah, I'll keep the manuals with it too. So that's just, for myself. But carrying on during this time, prior to the Saturn, so you have the shit show that is 32X, and the only good thing, in my opinion, that came out of the 32X, which is something that we could all play on PC even back then, was Doom. But that's what introduced me to Doom, was the 32X. Is my buddy, his mom actually loved playing Doom. His mom actually beat Doom. That's how I seen Doom actually get beat, because him and I were kids, couldn't figure it out. His mom actually beat the damn game. She loved it. She'd be
Someone to say that before.
Oh my god, it's hilarious, man. Like, we'd be sitting there trying, and she's like, get the hell out of here, let me play my game. We would just watch her like, how the hell are you figuring this stuff out? Because Doom is a very challenging game for those if you've never played it. Like the original one, try to play that with no walkthrough. Good fucking luck. There's so many secrets you got to figure out, and doors and shit. Oh, it's a nightmare. So, again, during this time, you got 32X, and Nintendo, their answer to the Sega CD was they were going to develop the Super Nintendo CD, and what they actually ended up doing, because remember, this whole time, it's the back and forth. Nintendo wants to kill Sega. Sega wants to kill Nintendo, right? And like Steve said, early on, the token slogan for Sega was, Sega does what Nintendo don't. Because that was the whole thing, was Sega was just a superior system, right? So they always had to go tit for tat. But what Nintendo eventually ended up doing was killing Sega indirectly. Like, it was not them technically. So by them trying to carry on an answer to the Sega CD, they hired a little company that would be known as PlayStation to help them create this Super Nintendo CD. And due to development disagreements, they basically were like, fuck you guys, and decided to go with Sony and create their own console, aka the PlayStation console, right? So what happens is that you go to E3, and then this all gets announced, and then now Sega's like, oh shit, you got this thing coming out now? Well, fuck, now we gotta hurry up and do something with this Sega Saturn, and we're not technically ready for it, but they didn't want to get demolished, because they probably felt heat, like, shit, here comes this console that now we don't have Nintendo just to deal with. Now we got these guys coming into the mix, and they actually look like they're going to do something, so we need to hurry up and get this out. July 8th of 95 was the Sega Saturn. So that's what I was saying. Like, the Saturn got rushed. It wasn't even ready. They didn't have a full library or nothing. Yeah, they just rushed out because they wanted people to buy it in anticipation for the library.
That's why a lot of people complain about, like, Clockwork Knight and a couple other those launch games.
Yeah.
They complain about them because they weren't finished.
Yeah.
because they rushed out the fucking door. So the sequel was actually supposed to be the other part of the game.
Exactly. Yep. All right. Yeah. So when you look at this, yeah. So Sega Saturn got rushed out after getting their toes stepped on by PlayStation, July 8th of '95, and then looking at PlayStation, they were released, and North America was September 9th of '95. So Sega had technically a 2 month jump, but as Steve and I were just discussing, you had games like Clockwork Knight that people were pissed about because they weren't finished. So you got Clockwork Knight 1, and then they released Clockwork Knight 2, which Clockwork Knight 2 was essentially supposed to be on Clockwork Knight 1, but because of shit getting rushed, you had to do shit like that. And they did have like Nights into Dreams. They had the original House of the Dead on there. I'm trying to think of what else they had on there.
So one that I want to throw in here because it's technically the first 3D platformer, even though it's 2.5D in my opinion. Bug came out before Super Mario 64, and Bug was really hyped up. That's the reason I went and got number one and two, and everyone was super excited about it. They're like, "Ooh, a platformer with 3D elements." Bug launched, did great, but a few months later, if I remember correctly, Mario 64 came out and everyone completely forgot about Bug because no one cared. We didn't want 2.5D when you have a perfected 3D platformer right here.
Yeah. Yeah. So freaking, you got PlayStation, because that's the other thing too, is you got the Saturn competing, like you were saying, you said you got Bug. PlayStation has Crash Bandicoot. And it's like
Yeah, and Crash
Was,
down, blows it out of the water.
oh yeah, and Crash Bandicoot was the shit.
And then they eventually got Spyro too. It's over.
Oh yeah, dude. PlayStation was just slam dunking with titles like, oh my god.
And another cool thing while we're on the Saturn subject, the Saturn's capable of playing burn games or backups or reproduction games too, with either action replay or the pseudo Saturn Kai. There's a bunch of other options.
Yeah.
I know we didn't really talk about accessories with the other systems, which by the way, there's a ton for the Sega Genesis or the Saturn or the next one we're talking about. But there's a lot of unique things out there to check out, and there's also different ways to play those games other than emulation, is what I wanted to put in.
So by '98, when they were discontinued, it sold 9.26 million units, which I guess that doesn't really sound that bad. I guess, and they considered a commercial failure.
That's less than the Wii U, so I don't know.
I mean, let's do some comparing and contrasting. Let's see what the PlayStation did. You ready for this? Okay, so we were just talking about how the Sega Saturn did like 9.26 mil, and that was a commercial failure. You ready for this? And the end of 1998, PlayStation had 11 and a half.
That's it?
That's it.
And the Saturn failed at 9?
Yeah. Like
now my mind just
now I almost have to look up what did the N64 do. Okay. So the ending of this is the fiscal year. Okay, so not the actual year, the fiscal year, which is March of 98, the Nintendo 64 sold 15.22 million units.
Interesting.
So, I mean, if you wanted to say that the Saturn was a failure because it was behind PlayStation, I mean, I guess you could say that, but I mean, I still wouldn't say that's a failure. I mean, you sold 9.22 million units. That's a lot. It's not like the 32X that sold, just barely over a half a mil. Now that, yes, is a huge dumpster fire of a fail. And, but that's not really that bad. I mean, maybe unless they were, trying to look in comparison to yet again looking at Nintendo, like, oh, well, Nintendo did this. They damn near doubled us. It's like, I get it, but whatever. But the 64 was a great system, though. I can't knock it. It was a very good system. Some people say it's overrated because of a handful of titles. It actually did have a good library, I felt, but it didn't outdo PlayStation. I'll still fight people on that. Then when they say that the 64 was better, no. PlayStation had a more vast library overall. If you were to stack up the games that you would put in the great category, PlayStation is just like fucking way up there when it comes to great titles. And before we even get onto the Dreamcast, like Steve and I kind of briefly talked about this before we even started recording, was what Sega did up to the Saturn in such a short period of time. We're talking a 6-year window. They did what we would refer to now as a cash grab, and people get pissed off about those types of things because you're like, my pockets aren't endless. You know what I mean? Like, I got a budget here, and you gotta think. Like I said, 89 Genesis, 92 Sega CD, 94 32X, 95 brand new system. So if you bought a 32X, you got one. Not even a year later, you got a brand new system. They want you to drop $400 on. That's fucking nuts, and for no reason. Now Sega's got to deal with this coming out, and the big thing with the Saturn was 3D graphics and stuff like that as well, because like Nights into Dreams did look very visually appealing as a kid, because I can remember seeing commercials for that and it looked awesome, but I never got to play Nights into Dreams. I do have a copy of it now, thankfully, but I have yet to play it, and I do plan on playing it on the channel. But that was one that caught my eye. Have you gotten around to playing your copy yet, Steve?
Okay, so I played that for a very short amount of time, just to test it, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
It's still sitting over there. But I felt like the Saturn did better with the 2D games, or 2.5D for the most part, from what my collection is showing me anyway.
Okay.
The 3D games, they're fine, but it's the same thing I've already played.
Okay.
Like, one that I really, really want is like a stall. Like, it looks incredible, but it's expensive. So I don't know. I also heard things about the Saturn had 2 processors, and a lot of people didn't know how to utilize them.
Okay.
But I have to do more research on that one.
Yeah, there's stuff. Yeah, believe me, there's a lot of stuff. People that, I don't know everything. Steve doesn't know everything. We know some stuff. He knows some things that I don't know, and vice versa. But yeah, there's so many things when you dive down the rabbit hole of retro stuff. There's a lot of things that were going on that people had no idea about. Like, hell, they were still talking about, like, there's stuff that you can do with certain systems that people had no idea you could do, and if it wasn't for the internet and YouTube and stuff like that, we would never know. It's just it's a whole thing. But as of right now, I know that we are running out of time, sadly, for Steve and I to continue our banter, but we're going to stop where we are at and in talking about the N64, and we will pick up on a later date to go over this. But this is something that I have enjoyed talking about so far. I hope you have as well, Steve.
Oh yeah, absolutely, guys. Always a pleasure to be on Geeks of Rage.
That's right, because after all, we are geeks and we do rage at times.
All the time. What are you talking about?
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, all the time. Rather it's geek related or non, always rage. The blood's always boiling. But that aside, everybody, I hope you enjoyed this segment so far. But we will be back with part 2 at some point. I won't put a timeline on it because I'm not quite sure when I'm going to get this all edited. But as soon as we can get back together and record the second half, you guys will get it. But until then, we will see you in the next episode.